All right. Good morning, Doug. We have Q&A for today. There's been a lot that's happened over the last couple of days, and even some of the questions that have come in, I haven't updated them all. So we just have stuff from as of Thursday night, and a heck of a lot has happened in the world since Thursday night, and we will address a lot of that on Monday. But for now, let's get to these questions. Someone says, Doug, is the character for Charles Knight based in any way on people you've actually met, or is he 100% fictional?
Well, it is said that all first novels are at least semi-autobiographical, and that's true. And the best way, if you're writing fiction, is to draw from reality that you know personally. So yeah, as is usually the case with novels, the characters are composites. Nobody in particular is an exact person. So perhaps in the future novels, I'm going to write in friends of mine that would fit. But no, the answer is not yet.
Not yet.
Exactly.
But it is somewhat, partially at least, autobiographical, especially starting with Speculator. I mean, there are definitely pieces of that story that ring true in your personal life.
Yeah, exactly. When we get to Assassin, yes, I've been to jail a couple times, but nothing like what happens to Charles in the book. And no, I don't have any plan for immanentizing the eschaton by doing what Charles is doing in Assassin. So no.
All right, good. So they also ask if you could tell us how you got into playing polo and what effects it had on your life.
Well, when I was misallocating 4 years of my time and a bunch of money going to Georgetown, on Saturdays in the fall, we would always go out to Potomac, Maryland, to the polo field and kind of watch the game and then dance and get drunk afterwards out there in the country. But I liked the idea of playing polo, and actually earlier, I knew polo players and I always liked horses. So when I was living in Aspen, what do you know? But I was driving down Route 82, and there was a little sign. It said polo lessons, $50 an hour. I said, that sounds like a good deal. So my wife and I pulled in there and started taking lessons. Kind of a mistake, because it's good to know how to ride a horse before you play polo. But I thought I knew how to ride a horse. Proof of that is that I could stay on a horse when it went faster than a trot. So yeah, I can ride a horse. So of course, taking these polo lessons, I picked up all kinds of bad habits, riding, and bad habits of all kinds of ways. So I set myself back by years doing it the wrong way. But on the other hand, it was a lot of fun playing horse hockey. So that's how I did it. Just followed my nose. And then of course, I was in the polo world for about 20 years, which is not really a world that I'd advise anybody getting into. It's got its advantages, it's got its pluses, but I'm out of it now because a man's got to know his limitations.
But it was, why would you say it was a world you wouldn't recommend? Because I mean, you certainly did meet lots of interesting people from around the world through that gateway, didn't you?
Yeah, internationally, it's a different thing. But in the US, I mean, I played in Aspen, I played in Palm Beach in the US too, especially Palm Beach. That's the epicenter of polo. That's where the billionaires play polo. And frankly, I met a few other patrons, sponsors, which is what I was. See, polo is a strange sport. It's the only really athletic sport in the world where you can go out and hire the equivalent of Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and the best players in the world in basketball. They're not going to want to play with you. But in polo, yeah, the best polo players in the world will pay for you. That's what they do for a living, is play with patrons.
Hmm.
So the problem is that most of these patrons, they had a lot of money, but they didn't have much else to recommend them, as far as I could tell. I mean, I could hardly have a reasonable conversation with anybody. And all the other people, the grooms and such, they're horse people. What they're interested in is horses and not too much else. So it's a dead zone intellectually. You meet a lot of rich guys who've done stuff in business, but okay, that's a plus.
Mhm.
But
Internationally was different.
yeah, here's the advantage to playing polo from an international point of view is that I can still go to any capital city in the world where they play polo, and they do, and most of them. In fact, the first actual tournament polo game I ever played was in Accra, Ghana, where the Accra Polo Club invited the Stowe, Vermont Polo Club, all expenses paid. First class on American Airlines. They put us up in the hotels. It was really nice I went with the Stowe Club because I had a very good friend from Stowe, and they could only find 3 guys that were in a position to go. So he called me up and I went. So things like that happen. Look, when I was a member of the New Zealand Ambassadors Polo Club, because I played polo in New Zealand for years, basically a bunch of really tough farm boys that like to play horse hockey when they're not playing rugby. So it's a kind of a different class of polo than in the US, I found, but fun polo for that reason. And, I could have gone on the same kind of a junket to play with the Tehran polo team who invited the New Zealand ambassadors. And it would have been playing 3 tournament games in 3 cities in Iran. And that would have been interesting because I would have met, really interesting top of society people that played polo. But I didn't go because I'd already kind of given up the game and I was injured, and I could have bullshitted and said, but I didn't want to do that because I would have screwed things up if they thought they had a player that they didn't.
Yeah.
And at that point, I really couldn't play. So stuff like that happens. And, I could show up in any city in the world. They go to the polo club and get to know the guys. So
Expensive
yeah,
sport.
I recommend playing polo
It's
for that
expensive.
reason alone. Well, look, Winston Churchill said, a polo handicap is better than having a passport.
Mm,
And he was right in a way.
interesting. And so it is an expensive sport, if I recall, because you had to keep a stable of ponies on 3 continents, right?
Oh God, it was like running a small business that hemorrhages money. You've got to have 6 horses to start with, assuming you're playing 6 checker polo, which you are if you're playing with the big boys. And then you've got to have a couple of backups because some horses always injured, always. So that's expensive maintaining those horses because not only do you have to buy them each a new set of shoes every month. So it's like buying 2 pairs of Nikes for each horse every month for openers.
Yep.
And then they need their teeth floated they need vet bills. You got to stable them. You got to pay hay for them. You got to hire somebody to do this shit for you, unless you're going to do it yourself and it's a full-time job. You got to have the real estate for the stables for them. You've got to join the polo club, and that's not cheap. And then, if you're going to play decent polo, you want some people out there on the field that are really good players, and those are pros, and you got to pay them too. So it's really expensive. Now, if you find farm polo, just with some guys that like to play horse hockey, okay, that's cool. But they're kind of few and far between. Maybe the best way to start is to play polo cross. That's a good compromise. It's a combination of lacrosse with lacrosse on horseback.
Interesting.
Yeah, much cheaper. You only need one horse or maybe two. So that's probably the way to groove into it. After you learn how to ride properly, take lessons. It's a good idea.
Got it. Okay. All right. Something I've always wanted to do. I've never done it. So let's see.
Yeah. Well, listen, you're about the age when I took it up. But unfortunately, when you get into your early 40s, you're already at the age where a lot of players are retiring
Yeah.
because you can get beat up really good playing polo. It's easy to come off your horse and have a catastrophic accident. And believe me, I've had a couple of serious accidents. Everybody has one or two or five or 10 serious accidents. And I'm not just talking about coming off the horse and rolling and getting back on. I mean, so consider that.
Concussions, broken bones.
It's best a young man's game, which is to say people in their teens or 20s or early 30s, certainly.
Well,
Yeah, you could definitely do it, Matt. I did it.
all right. So let's see. Someone asks, someone says that they've got all the resources lined up to live anywhere, but they're curious as to whether or not you think it'd be better to leave the country, and if so, where, or instead just move to a red state.
Well, moving to a red state is a good idea for all kinds of reasons. Chances are better you're going to find people that you can actually talk about something other than just the weather and the state of the roads with. To start with, taxes will be lower, regulations will probably be lower. So sure, that's a good move. But look, the ideal way to do this is to have a crib outside your home country. I've said this for decades, and it really is a good idea. So, if things really get nasty, and it can happen absolutely anywhere unexpectedly, well, as long as the planes are still flying, you can go to your other home.
Yep. Yeah. So having a backup makes a lot of sense. One of the things that making this a harder decision now than it was before is because of the COVID hysteria, all the border closures, and you experienced this personally in Uruguay. But I have had my assistant sort of monitoring border restrictions, and they're increasing. And so, like, there were as of December 28th, there were 18 countries that had a total border closure. So this is not open for really anybody. And as of January 8th, so let's say roughly 10 days later, there were 27. So it grew by 50%, essentially, the number of total border closures over the last 10 days or so. And the same thing for people that are just banning high risk regions, and what coming from the United States is considered a high risk region. So gone up tremendously.
Well, yes, and then is this COVID hysteria. I don't know when it's going to go away, or frankly, if it'll ever go away. As odd as that sounds, I mean, it's such an excellent method of control. You've got to have a COVID exam showing you're negative within 72 hours of traveling, but there's no guarantee half the time that you can get your exam results back within 72 hours. So it makes it very hard to plan to fly internationally for that reason. In addition, this is a worldwide trend, and I can't see it going back to happy days again.
No, and I think this is a tough one. I'm looking at all this exactly the same way our viewer is. Like where to be and how do you best create the most optionality for your life. And so it does seem to me that if you're fundamentally based in the U.S., at least getting to a place where you're a little more distance from other people, out of an urban center, certainly. And then, in a red state is probably better, although that's not foolproof at all. And then certainly if you haven't started, definitely looking at where you can go internationally and seeing what your options are. Because there are a lot of places like Mexico you've been able to fly to, but you can't drive to, they have land borders closed. In Colombia, where we went over Christmas, we could fly there. We didn't even need a COVID test to go there at the time, but you couldn't cross land borders there. So not to say you would, because it's in the middle of nowhere, but still, it's very interesting. And I think the thing is, the right time to do this would have been a couple decades ago when you were first talking about it, Doug. And I think the second best time is probably today.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a Saturday, so certainly Monday morning. But another interesting thing about being in these days of the plague, being outside the US, is that not wearing a mask, which I hate doing for all kinds of reasons, it's not viewed as a political statement. So, if I walk down the street in Punta del Este, uh, if I don't wear a mask, I mean, it's not telling people that I'm a red stater or anything like that. They just figured, guy's got health reasons. They don't really care, frankly.
Right. Right. Well, and also just being the gringo also, makes it so that they almost are used to seeing odd things with you anyway, and they don't really know. They know you don't know what's going on. They feel like
Yeah,
you're probably just confused, and you get all kinds of excuses made for you, essentially because you're a foreigner.
you're exactly right. But if I walk down the street in Aspen without my mask, which is illegal to start with, Jesus, I mean the shaming and the confrontations, I mean, it wouldn't be worth it. It would wind. So no, there are lots of advantages to getting the hell out of Dodge at this point.
So, what do you think of Cyprus as a good place for citizenship?
Uh, as I recall, they do offer citizenship by economic citizenship. It's $1 million, more or less, in that area anyway. So good passport. When a plane is hijacked, nobody says all the Cypriots line up, we're going to shoot you first. It doesn't happen. Um, so good passport, part of the European Union. Okay, great. Expensive. So there are other passports that are almost as good that are a lot cheaper. The cheapest economic passport is from Dominica, about $100,000 plus legal fees. But you can spend a few years in countries like in Argentina, 2 years residence, only 6 months of the year, become an Argentine citizen. It's a very good passport, like 145 countries visa free. Uh, Uruguay, not Uruguay, Paraguay is easier in some ways. You get your residence card. It'll take a day with a lawyer. Come back 3 years later, and you're a citizen, basically. Simple test, a couple of pay. So there are things you can do, and you should do them.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Someone here who's studying physics and says they'll be graduating with a PhD in physics, and they're wondering what your view of the long term is for the mining sector. Like, do you think that there's, the 2030s and 2040s when their career will really be, they think, really hitting? Do you think that the mining sector will have demand in the same way that it might right now?
I don't think I don't think it's going to have much demand for the next 4 years, and maybe even beyond that, because with the Green New Deal, they hate politically incorrect industries like oil and mining in particular. So that's one thing to consider. But look, I'm a big fan of geologists. I know lots of geologists, lots. And generally, I would characterize geologists as outdoorsy intellectuals.
Yeah.
I find that geologists, more than mining engineers are kind of like engineers, but different kind of guys become geologists. Now you're thinking about geophysics. Okay, that's being a geologist. But look, depends on whether you want to make money or not. Because if you're going to be a geophysicist working in a university lab or working for a big company, Newmont or Rio or one of these things, you're a salaried guy. There's no upside in that. You got to do that for a while to kind of get the experience and earn your chops. But the real interesting stuff and the big money is to become an entrepreneur in the mining business. And to become a proper entrepreneur, somebody who's more likely to succeed, it's really good to have an advanced degree, like in geophysics, for instance. So, but this is a long-term plan. Maybe you're planning too far ahead, you know, and I'm the wrong person to ask because as we talked the other day,
That far ahead. Yeah.
yeah, when I come to a fork in the road, I take it. And so I'm not a planner from that point of view, but yeah, it's good. Listen, the whole world runs on metals, and they're going to have to find them and mine them. But it's such a pain in the ass industry now. It's, lawyers are more important than geologists today, quite frankly, in the mining business.
It's true in a lot of businesses, not just mining.
Yes, it's true. We have a plague of lawyers for just that reason. They shouldn't be necessary. I mean, more than just a couple in a town or something like. It's like in Japan. I think there's only 5,000 lawyers in all of Japan.
Wow.
Shockingly low number. In this country, we've got like 1 million. I mean, literally 1 million. I think that's actually the number.
Wow. Okay, so let's go to the next question. They say, does Doug think Bitcoin will ever be a reserve asset for nations or central banks?
I think it's possible because, as you may know, I think they're going to go back to gold because it's the only kind of, these governments, especially as countries become more nationalistic and close their borders more and have more wars, this is the direction the world is going. They don't want to trust each other's currencies, so they're going to go back to gold. But they might use Bitcoin too. So possible. Could well happen.
Okay. All right. Someone asks if you're familiar with the political trichotomy. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
I don't either. They don't actually give you much information about it. He just says everyone thinks in terms of right and left, and a more accurate model of people's values is the political trichotomy.
Well, I don't know about a trichotomy, but I've always thought that the most accurate way to define people politically wasn't just right and left, but in a quadrants, where you have a y-axis and an x-axis, where the y-axis is how you feel about social freedom from 0 to total, and how you feel about economic freedom from none. So you've got the totalitarians down here and the traditional, rightists who don't believe in social freedom and say they believe in economic freedom. And then the libertarians up at the other end of the quadrant. So I don't know how you break that down into three. Maybe he'd write and tell us, but I've always seen it as.
Yeah, it must be something. Yeah, I've never heard of it before, but the quadrants make sense to me. Let's see. So Emily asks, this is in response to the incredible conversation we had with Paul Rosenberg, the timing of which was just amazing. We talked about the ethical justification for revolution, and that day, in fact, was the day that there was what people are now calling a riot in D.C., where some people broke into the Capitol, and most people just other people just seemed to follow them in. Paul talked about the idea that you needed to rebel in little ways early rather than waiting until the rebellion had to be, you're put in such a corner, it just had to be a big rebellion. And so she says, at what point are we now in society where it's still a low level or medium level threat to arrest, where we can rebel in little ways? Or she says, are we at the stage already where it's a high level threat to address?
I think it's going towards high as we speak, because you listen to these Democrats, especially. I mean, lots of these crazy people have made statements about, rounding up these dangerous Trumpsters. And I'm not a Trumpster, incidentally, but I'm worse, for God's sake. I mean, I'm an anarchist, but yeah, look, these people have actually talked about putting them in camps, whether it's for reasons of COVID denial or, yeah, it's moving towards that right now. So,
The problem
that's what I've said. I've said this for a couple of years now. We're on the ragged edge of a civil war. So it could be quite dangerous. Yeah,
and
we're going towards the extreme. We're going red, sure.
I wonder though, one of the things that one of the distinctions that Paul was trying to make, I think, was that, these little rebellions are when, these little, are in response to acts of abuse, direct acts of abuse, and so when somebody abused you directly, your employer, makes you go to an include diversity and inclusivity training session, for instance, where you're told that being white is bad, like something like that. That's an abuse. And Paul would say that in that moment, you have to rebel against it. You have to say something. And if you don't, then it's just the abuse becomes worse and worse. And then it does explode over. So I think, the biggest thing is that I think where people are having hard time with this is that with everything that's happening right now is that they confuse the abuse that's happening, the perceived abuse, and I'm not saying it's not real from a narrative or ideological standpoint, but it's that abuse is fundamentally different than an abuse that is actually of you in particular. It's much more like people want to go and fight because of Biden's going to be president or something, and like that's obviously that's you can think what you want about it, but it's not like that's not necessarily an attack on you directly. I mean, how do you see that distinction, or do you?
Look, the only solution to this is you either live in a country or a society where people don't know, and frankly, they don't give a damn what your political views are. This is the advantage of being an American living in a foreign country. They really don't know. It's not relative to them, and they don't care, frankly. So you're not going to get in trouble being an American living abroad. If I was living in the US right now, I can't keep my mouth shut when I encounter these people. So I'd be asking for trouble, frankly, living in the US once they allow you to circulate a little bit. Um, so that's the first answer. The second answer is make sure you have a lot of money. And if you don't have a lot of money, you got to ask yourself what you're doing wrong. I mean, if you don't have enough money to go where you want and do what you want, and yes, if you're young, there's certainly an excuse. It takes time to make money and to learn the things that you need to know to make money. Yes, of course. But at a certain point in life, if you haven't accumulated enough, then you've been making some serious mistakes along the way. Because the answer, in addition to the geographical one that I mentioned, is to make sure you got enough capital so that you're insulated from this nonsense. You don't have to go to an office and live in a cubicle and answer to your supervisor. I couldn't do that. And I don't have to, fortunately. So put yourself in that position. That's the only answer as far as I know. Can you think of anything else, Matt?
No, I think that's right. But people who don't have or can't imagine how they could have enough money, though. I know that I can just imagine the psychic pushback that you're getting to the things you just said. But the problem is that most people actually, their income isn't actually the biggest problem. It's the expenses. People live, just they live in a way where they assume the future is going to be at least slightly better than the past. So they live their expenses really pushed up close to that line, and a lot of people live beyond that line by taking on debt, living their future income today. And I think that if the COVID stuff wasn't a wake up call for people about, hey, listen, maybe you should spend less, maybe you should work capital, maybe you should cut your expenses, maybe sell some of your assets that are not assets, but the stuff that you have that you don't need. I don't know. I don't know what would be, but the biggest thing is people go, my job only pays me a certain amount. And I think that you can cut your expenses dramatically, and, you should be saving half your income. I think and people don't understand that people get rich because they saved they saved 25 to 50% of their income. They lived way below their means. And then they invested that capital in themselves and in assets that appreciated in value. And I think that people miss that key part of sacrifice and savings, which is a requirement to being wealthy. Like it doesn't happen without that coming first.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, unless you're a member of the Lucky Sperm Club and your parents just give you a pile of money, yeah, you got to earn it. So you got to. So look, what are you going to do? You're going to. I put together a kind of a mnemonic, which I can't remember right now, but it's basically the first thing you do is liquidate, and that means take all the shit that you've got in your storage unit or your basement or your garage or your apartment and sell it. Get rid of it because now you've got less stuff to maintain and you've got a little bit of capital and you're going to feel a little bit more air mobile
Mhm.
and lightened up. And then there's a whole bunch of things, but that's one thing you got to do. And along with that, cut your expenses and stop spending $5 a day at Starbucks, little things like that. Okay. And then try to improve your job. I mean, that's, they don't have the yellow pages anymore, but the yellow pages used to be wonderful because you could just page through them and look at businesses and call anybody and see what good or service you could offer to that person running the business. Well,
Right.
you can still do that online. I kind of like paper. I still read books on paper, so old school. But anyway, that's what you should do also.
Yep. A lot of people have enough time. I mean, people think now that working 40 hours a week is full time. I have to say that if people, I saw this quote somewhere where someone said people who work weekends are, you know, uh, people who are rich. Oh gosh, I can't remember, but something about how they work weekends. Like, so if you're not working on over the weekend, it's because you're already rich or you never will be. Was the quote. That's what it was. If you're not working on the weekend, you're already rich or you never will be. And I think that's true.
Yeah, and part of the key is you got to find something that you really like doing. And so if you like doing it, you'll do it over the weekends too.
Right. That's right.
It's not a grind where you got to fight to go to the office or wherever you're going, and you can't wait for that 5 o'clock bell to ring.
Yeah. And so, I mean, when my early days, I was definitely doing work that I didn't, I definitely wouldn't put it as like something I necessarily love, but I did always like being like solving. I always loved solving problems. I always liked, showing up and doing a job better than other people would do it, like just like trying to bring excellence to my work. And I loved the counting the money as it came in. Like I'm not a huge money motivated guy, but when I was poor, it really made a big difference to me. So I was like, I felt like I was getting freedom by doing these things, and I was willing to trade. I had at that my 20s, a lot of time, not much money, so I was willing to trade my money, for with the work I could get until I could do the work that I wanted to do.
Absolutely. I second that emotion. I felt exactly the same way myself. So I guess that's the answer.
Okay, so someone asked, Doug, in Uruguay, how is life there? And now you've been back there now for a month or so, a few weeks at least.
Hmm. Well, look, I've got a nice house in the middle of a big farm, and I've really got just about everything that I want. So this could be anywhere. Frankly, I could be living in the Congo right now. Uh, and I could be actually. And it could be equally present. It depends on your circumstances within a country. But speaking to Uruguay, I mean, unless you've got a lot of assets, you come here, you'll rent an apartment, uh, and then what are you going to do? Okay, that's the problem. Then what are you going to do? There you are sitting in your apartment. Okay, now you're in Uruguay, or you're in Colombia, or it doesn't matter where you are. You're sitting there. Now what are you going to do? That's the problem. So yeah, Uruguay's fine. It's a slow, pleasant, backward little welfare state, which has its inconveniences, which mostly I can dodge. But that's what Uruguay is like. It's about soybeans and cattle and timber and the beaches during 3 months in the summer. And that's it. So do I recommend it? Look, there's 200 countries in the world, so take your choice. That's why you got to get on a plane. Oh, excuse me. It was easier in the past. And see as many of them as you can and see what you like, okay?
It always seems to me though, it's your particular setup is what matters most, you know. And like you said, you could be in a lot of different countries, and it wouldn't make a difference.
No, it wouldn't make a difference. In fact, like we were talking the other day, and I don't think it was on air, that maybe I was talking to somebody else because, I'm online talking to people so much, I forget who the hell was I talking to. And I said, I tried to convince my wife that we ought to move to Kinshasa in the Congo for 6 months and then go to Moscow for another 6 months. And that'd be a great idea because you'd be unusual. And if you reach out, you get to know everybody that was important in those places over 6 months. And that could be extremely valuable from all kinds of points of view. So, but just, going to Uruguay and camping out in an apartment, I don't know about that.
Yep, I agree. I agree. Okay, so Doug, would you say that Spartacus was a hero or a villain?
Well, he's certainly portrayed as a hero today, and I'd say he really was, because he was a Thracian, which is to say from what the northern Greece. He wasn't really a Greek, uh, but probably spoke Greek or whatever the language was similar to Greek there. And he was captured and made to be a gladiator. So yeah, I'm all for Spartacus. If you're being enslaved, you've got every right to kill the people that capture you, and in order to survive, get a bunch of other guys and uh, cookie cutter that mother and take the show on the road.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm all for Spartacus. And people say, well, what about the slavery thing? Well, look, in the first place, slavery was a universal condition in the whole world among everybody, almost everywhere, just until 150 years ago. So uh, people forget that. I mean, we live in unique times where slavery is not accepted as a commonplace. And I don't know, perhaps it had to do with, perhaps the question is, was he a villain because he wasn't fighting against slavery. In fact, if he'd gotten away, either by boat from southern Italy or crossing the Alps to, who knows what his plans were. This is lost in the mist of history. But he wasn't trying to abolish slavery. He wasn't a hero for that. He definitely would have had slaves wherever he wound up if he was successful. He was fighting for his personal freedom. So yeah, I'm all for it. Yeah, sure, he was absolutely a hero.
Well, speaking of, so I think the idea of slavery as a moral bad is something that has been broadly accepted now in the world. Almost everywhere, people see it as morally as a bad thing, which means that it seems like our moral standards seem to evolve over time. And someone commenting about something you said, and during one of the episodes, they said, Mr. Casey said, quote, "I don't do the morally wrong things. So I'm not random in that way." As we're talking about like how you planned, and this was related to our New Year's resolution video, actually. So I was asking about goals and stuff like that, and how you find your way in the world with that. And you said, well, you don't do the morally wrong thing. And so that adds up over time, doing the morally right thing. But their question is, how do you know? Whose morals are you using? And they said, my intention is not to be belligerent or contrary or abrasive in any manner. I just have a great deal of respect for you both from what I know of you. And I would value your answer on this question. Like, where do the morals come from? Whose morals are they?
Well, I don't read the Bible for moral guidance, or at least not any more than I might read Greek myths or novels. It's no special source of wisdom as far as I can tell. So, okay, so what do I believe? How do you determine what's moral and what's not? Let's keep it really simple. Two rules, well, kind of two. One is the non-aggression principle. Just don't attack other people. Don't steal their stuff. Or look, two rules: do all that you say you're going to do, and don't aggress against other people or their property. Okay, that's the basis. Nobody gets taught those things, frankly. I don't know of many parents that teach those two simple rules. I mean, even having 10 commandments, you can't even remember 10 commandments. Nobody can. That's why primitive people talk about 2, 3, many, because they can't count past 3 typically.
Right.
So you don't want more than 2 rules. Forget about 10 rules. Just remember those 2 things, and that's probably enough. But actually, I think I might have said this before, but I go further than that, because just like physicists today are trying to take all the basic laws of nature and express them with just one great law. And my one great moral law is this: the whole of the law shall be do as thou wilt, but be willing to accept the consequences. So do anything. People do anything anyway, but try to think out what the consequences are going to be. And then if you're willing to live with it, okay. I mean, I think that really keeps it simple. But by keeping really smart, it makes people think about what depredations they're about to commit.
Right. And I think that really works for, I think that's interesting to think about that right now in light of everything that's happened recently, the storming of the Capitol, for instance. The people who were doing, part of that, I'll just call it a mostly peaceful protest, because I think that's the label we're using for these things. It should be consistent about these things. So at the mostly peaceful protest, they were there, just expressing their views, using their First Amendment rights and stuff like that. And, the assumption that if you're operating within those, what you think are your rights will mean that you'll be okay, like that you have some cover, that you'll be protected from attack or assault by others because you're doing the quote morally right thing or the right thing, But in fact, some of those people are going to be prosecuted for terrorism. Some of them are going to spend, many of them are going to spend many years in federal prison for it. And is it right? That's not even the point. It's not even matter if it's right or wrong. I think it's just they did what they did, but they probably didn't understand the consequences.
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah, we have to talk about this next week.
Yeah, we'll save this
about the storming of the Capitol.
Crazy. Let's do that on Monday. But let me get to the next question. Is with respect to your high ground novels, they're really curious about what the division of labor has been between you and John Hunt. I mean, writing partnerships are very difficult, notoriously, I think. But John has been a great partner to you, as I can see from my observations, and helping to bring the vision of these novels to fruition. And so maybe you can just talk a little bit about that writing partnership.
Yeah, it's been. I was really lucky to have come across John, because he was getting sick and tired of being he was a tenured professor of pulmonology at the University of Virginia. And he didn't like the environment. It was just entirely too PC. And there's no money in medicine anymore anyway. So, why bother? So we were introduced by Jeffrey Tucker, who runs the American Institute for Economic Research in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. I think that's what Jeffrey's doing now. So anyway, it was great. And the way our partnership works, and it's a good formula, is I'm the front man and John is the backup guy, the back office guy. And as far as doing everything. Also, when we met, I basically sponsored the whole enterprise, and I told John what the narrative would be for these 7 novels, 3 of which are done, and asked him to create, the plot line and ins and outs. And so John basically does the outline of the book and some broad writing, and then I edit it, or mostly just rewrite it, because it's much easier, I find, and I think anybody finds, to basically have a springboard to jump off from than it is to create the swimming pool from starting with an earth mover.
Yeah.
So that's the way we do it, and it works out really, really well, I think.
I think it does too. I mean, I was exchanging emails with him the other day, and as a PS to it, I said, thanks for, for partnering with Doug on these books. Cause, I'd heard about the vision for them for years before, that you finally got to work on them. And without John, I'd worry it'd still just be in your head.
It wouldn't have happened without John. And I hate talking the talk without walking the walk. So I'd come to the conclusion, I got to either stop talking about these novels or write the goddamn thing. And John made this all possible. So
yeah, he's great. He's good. They've turned out really well. And of course, there'll be a link in the description if you want to buy his books. And that leads us to the next thing, where somebody says, as much as I love this channel and what you guys doing this, I'm becoming really skeptical here about what's for sale. It seems that there's no pitch, that there is a pitch to buy a book or gold stocks. And of course, it makes me wonder if this entire channel is designed to sell books. Nothing wrong with selling a book or promoting a business, but I think it waters down the message. First of all, if we're trying to sell books, we're not doing a good job. Let's be honest.
This is just an amazing question. It's said that there are no stupid questions, and actually, I think that's true. So I won't say that, since there are no stupid questions. But this is an absurd and a ridiculous question. I mentioned the books because they're on my mind. And if you don't want to hear about it, and I think we've probably spent a total in the many, many hours we've been doing these so far. I think if we've spent 15 minutes pitching basically Assassin, I'd be surprised.
I would too. So, also, if our goal was to sell books, I mean, we are objectively not doing a good job, because it's not like this is top 100 on.
I mean, this would be it would be really stupid on our part to use this as a means of selling books. I mean, there's no money in books anyway. So this question approaches stupidity. But then the other part of the question is, and sell gold stocks. I don't sell gold stocks. I'm not a mining promoter. This is ridiculous. I mean, I'm not trying to tell people what I'm doing and so anyway.
You know what I love about this question, Doug?
Not all of our subscribers are rocket scientists.
Well, this question reveals more about the other participants in the, in the guru market than anything else. And I think the fact is that so people have grown to become suspicious of anybody who's actually out there giving any information, that they must have some agenda, and they must be trying to do something, and if it's almost like if there isn't an obvious quid pro quo, then people look at it and go, well, then there's something, maybe it must be there. It's not obvious to me. And I think it's reasonable. I think someone could be so cynical about the world at this point, because most people are grifters or rent seekers or freeloaders of one form or another. And, the reason we're doing this, and actually I wrote a little bit about this on my blog, just so people saw it, was because I feel like that there's a lot of people out there right now that are talking and yet don't have much wisdom in the things that they're saying, even when they're right. There's not a lot of wise speakers. And it was a shame to me that someone who I knew well did not have any kind of an online platform or whatever, and wasn't actually communicating. People couldn't find out. There wasn't no wise voice out there saying these things. So I have kind of goaded you into doing these things with me every day to um, try and alter the landscape a little bit. And why? I mean, maybe it's a totally fruitless exercise. I get to talk to you, which I enjoy, and maybe we get some karma out of it. And I think so far, that's all I can imagine will probably be there. But I can understand why people would be so cynical. I can understand.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Matt, because it's come to the point in this country where you really can't trust anything, any institution. You can't trust, you absolutely can't trust the government. You can't trust your church. You certainly can't trust the tech companies. You can't trust anything. So, yeah, I can understand where that, good point. I mean, where that question actually arose from. Okay.
But meanwhile, you should go buy Doug's book, Assassin, by the way, for your benefit, not for ours.
Yeah.
So someone says this is someone who comments regularly on the videos here, and kind of laughs at some of the coincidences between his background and your background. He says he's not a business guy, but he was a pole vaulter, a mediocre one. You mentioned that you tried to do that in high school, and he asked though what you would characterize as your unique strengths. Like, what are the things that makes Doug Casey, Doug Casey, young man entering the world? What made you unique? Your strengths compared to others?
Right. Yeah. Hmm. Well, I'm not sure that when I was young, I stood out in almost any way. I mean, look, in high school and college, I mean, you got physical and mental, and if you would, spiritual. So physically, I never liked team sports, frankly. So I went out for track. And since I couldn't pole vault, I wound up running the 440. But I went to meets, which is the first hurdle, because you got to be kind of at least good enough to go to an interscholastic meet. So I did that, but frankly, I was totally mediocre. I never got a medal. Uh, I was boxing in high school and also in college, and I was better at that actually. Uh, that, but not good. I mean, my friend Rick Rule, who a lot of you guys might know, he was a Golden Gloves boxer. That's good.
Good.
So I wasn't that good, you know, and I don't know. It's
What would you say then? Let's pick a not today, but maybe roll back the clock 15 years or so. When you were 20 years. How would you describe your unique strengths then? You must have had some.
oh well, yeah, very inner driven. In other words, as we were discussing before, you can either be driven or guided gyroscopically or by radar. I was definitely always gyroscopically guided, and uh, very independent for that reason. And gee, I don't know. That's a very good question. Maybe we're talking about nature and nurture here. Can't answer the question. I actually don't know. I was precocious, though. That's true.
Okay.
I was always smarter than the other kids in grade school and in high school. And yeah, I was precocious. At this point, I'm not sure I'm smarter than anybody else. The world, I feel like the world has caught up with me. So I'm not giving you any kind of an answer that's worth anything right now, am I?
Well, I think you are. So I think the I can't say the word, not radar motivated, but motivated internally, like a gyroscope. You have a gyroscope that gives you a sense of direction. I think that's a really important distinction. And I think that is an extremely rare trait. If we think of the people that we know, that we have close relationships with in our life now, the circle that we associate with, that would probably be true of all of them. We would probably say they all are motivated by an internal gyroscope, rather than looking at the external world and sort of trying to, I don't know, follow some dogma or follow some, social signaling solution or whatever. I mean, I think that's a unique characteristic for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's true, because when you look at a school of starlings, or a flock of starlings, or a school of fish, they all move together. It's almost like a shoal of these animals. And I could never relate to that. So if I related to anything, it would be, what would be my favorite animal? Probably a leopard.
I was gonna say leopard. I swear. Or I was gonna say, like, I was like, well, yeah, I was gonna say leopard or jaguar, and I'm like, they're the same. So
Pretty much, yeah. Just the different continent, more or less the same
yeah,
methodologies. Yeah, precisely.
I agree with that. And so the other thing that I would say, so just as an outside observer of you over, even longer than we've known each other, the other thing that stands out is your definitely your intellect and your communications abilities through writing and through speaking. I mean, you have some of the most shocking speeches online that just wake people up out of their state. Where you're talking about Americans being whipped dogs, really challenging the mold that we operate under, and I think it really wakes people up. I think you're very good at that.
Yeah, I try not to praise the wisdom, the innate wisdom of the American people and all this bullshit, because it's not true, for one for one thing. Yeah.
So I'd say those are definitely some things. Okay, next question is, and we'll just do a couple more here. Somebody says, well, they want us to discuss the different, or what thoughts on vulture capitalists and vulture capitalism. Those, and I don't know if this should be a topic for a whole other video, or if you want to just take a minute or two and just even respond to those labels. What do you think about that? Vulture capitalist, vulture capitalism.
Yeah, well, they are labels, because there's nothing wrong with being a vulture capitalist. I mean, you're giving people a bid for a pile of crap, which nobody wants. So that's what a vulture does. He consumes something that's already dead and serves a useful purpose doing that. It's very much anti-capitalist, anti-free market, which is a little bit different from capitalist, incidentally, different subject. It's like calling Vanderbilt and Astor and Rockefeller and these people from the 19th century, calling them robber barons. No, they weren't robbers. I mean, they got wealthy because they created a huge amount of goods and services and made them available to the common man. But they're characterized, besmirched as being robber barons, and vulture capitalists are the same type of thing. It's a ridiculous, it's name calling, essentially.
Yeah, when you go back to the two rules you mentioned earlier, it's to do all you say you're going to do and to not aggress on a person or their property. If no one is forcing businesses to liquidate their assets, instead it's a series of decisions they made and they're going bankrupt. And this vulture capitalist is the one bid that'll come here and use their destroyed carcass of a business and try and find value in it. I mean, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Okay. All right. So let's see. It's not to say that I'm sure that you love that you're a big fan of some of these finance groups like Goldman Sachs people and the modern finance. I assume that I think often people say if you support vulture capitalists and vulture capitalism, or you don't think that those things are negative things, it doesn't mean that you necessarily believe it. And I shouldn't put words in your mouth.
No.
Finance is all good, and these financialization of everything is a good thing.
Yeah, and anyway, those people are mainly cronies that are living off of the state as parasites, where the state's doing a lot of their dirty work for them and making the money available and so forth. So once again, it's a question of people not thinking things out and confusing words, confusing concepts, having generally foggy thinking. So yeah. No, I despise Goldman Sachs.
All right, so let's see what someone asks. What are the top 10 books you should read? I know we talked about books before, but just think about the time, what's happening in the world right now. Are there a couple of books that you think that would help people better understand the world that we're living in today and what might come next?
Well, look, actually, I'm trying to amuse myself uh, reading as much as anything else right now. And I'm just finishing James Michener's book, Tales of the South Pacific. Interesting book. He won a Pulitzer Prize for it. It's not a well-written book. In fact, it's a horribly written book. How he got this prize is a mystery to me. That said, uh, the stories in the book are really good stories about stuff that was happening in the South Pacific. It's not a war book. It's just where the war is the background and what's going on. Some of the characters he comes up with, like Bloody Mary, for instance, who occurs again in the musical South Pacific. So I'm reading that today, okay? And it's actually interesting from a historical point of view and a thought point of view, but I don't know. That's what I'm doing now. So that's kind of answering the question, but I think we mentioned this before, and I thought about it, and ethics, politics, and psychology are three very important areas of intellectual endeavor. And ethics, no question in my mind that the best book is Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness, 100, 120 pages, something like that. And when it comes to politics, undoubtedly, it's Morris and Linda Tannehill's book, The Market for Liberty. It's brilliant, also very short, pithy, well-written. And psychology, I'm a huge fan of Eric Hoffer and his book, The True Believer. And actually, it's more than psychology, it's a human nature. And, we can talk about history books and science books and literature books, but there's such a gigantic universe with, I understand, 1.5 million new books published every year. And they're all saying, me, read me. And of course, as Pareto's law tells us, 80% of everything is crap. In fact, out of the 80%, out of the 20% that's not crap, 80% of that's really not very good. So you've really got to cull these things. But those are three important books.
Yeah, I think so too. I actually just finished rereading Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. I hadn't read it since, I don't know, maybe I was 20, and I vaguely remembered parts of it, but I wanted to, I reread it because I wanted to I wanted to rethink about the way that things were being framed. About the main character essentially trying to live with integrity and live for himself. Live for the pursuit of his creative pursuits, basically, and it's an integrity he showed. So, and see the specific way she wrote about it. But I definitely agree with virtue of selfishness. I think that's super important. I think that word is hard for people because it's just been given. It's just seen as this. It's almost been twisted in the meaning of it. Actually, I think the idea of selfishness has been twisted into something that it's not what Ayn Rand even meant. I think that it's something entirely different. So it's a taboo thing. Which is why the title is still great. Actually, The Virtue of Selfishness. It's so pithy. It's more pithy now than before because the meaning of that word is.
It's very upfront. And I've found over the years that people's reaction to Ayn Rand is a litmus test of their actual character, not just their personalities. I mean, people that don't like Rand tend to, in my opinion, be like the villains in her novels. I mean,
Right.
they're psychologically bent and dirty. I mean, and they can defend it and say, oh, it's childish and, that's not the word. Yeah, right. But it's a great litmus test how people react around.
Yeah, and there's
Although she herself personally, I got to meet her just before she died. And I found personally she was, very gracious and very nice. But that was just one side of her personality. And she knew I was a fan. If I hadn't been, it would have been a different story.
Yep. But I think that's normal, right? You can't expect people to walk around like Mother Teresa all the time, and even she had a dark side, according to our Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, I suspect he was right actually about Mother Teresa.
I think he probably was. Boy, the world could use somebody like him now, don't you think? I mean,
yeah, I'm sorry he kicked the bucket. And here's kind of a fun fact. You know who introduced me to Christopher Hitchens? Paul Wolfowitz.
oh, right.
Yeah. So this is all very odd. I'm having lunch with Wolfowitz, and Hitchens calls him on the phone, and so that's how I met Hitchens. So and of course Hitchens, the problem with him was he was a great civil libertarian, but he was a neocon. He liked the idea of, he was confused in that way. So
There's something about he just took a particular interest in trying to saw Islam as this unique threat as compared to other things, and we needed to be aggressive at going and trying to thwart it, and I don't know, it was a weird thing for him.
yeah, it's like it's like Rosanna said, if it's not one thing, it's something else. It's always something. And I'm very anti-Mohammedanism on a number of bases, but you're not going to destroy the thing in a war. That's not going to work.
No, I'm pretty sure that's been tried historically, hasn't it? I'm pretty sure there's the Crusades.
I think it's been tried for like about more than 1,000 years.
Exactly. Yeah. Seems to only have encouraged them, to be honest. But
Yeah.
well, okay. We'll just leave it at that, and then on Monday we got to get into this kind of the heat of the moment stuff that's going on, and there's a lot of interesting things happening, from the storming of the Capitol to all these purges that are taking place on social media, including banning the president. So we have lots to talk about on Monday, and definitely looking forward to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, I presume the world will still be here on Monday.
We'll see. Thanks, Doug. We'll talk to you then.
Okay, Matt. Thank you.